Alrighty, folks, you probably know it's Fed Day, but did you also know it's dot plot day? This is something that happens about every 90 days. We basically get 19 Fed participants to talk about what they see happening over the next year across 4 or 5 important variables. Anna, I think the dot plot's going to be pretty telling for what changes and what they see coming forward. What do you think?
Yes, I agree. And I actually, part of me expects the dot plot to be a little bit better, meaning rates come
Mm,
down a little more than they thought before because
sure.
inflation is starting to come down. But part of me says they don't want to do that because it's going to make the markets rally too much and it's going
Mm,
to make their job harder. So although it's supposed to be independent what they really think, I think they care more about what they say and how it impacts markets than what they do for their personal, accuracy of their crystal ball, if you will. So I don't expect it to be meaningfully different than what we saw 90 days ago, although
mm,
inflation has come down. We've also seen, some, very high GDP numbers out of
yeah.
out of November, much
Yeah.
higher than expected. We saw holiday shopping generally up, although
Yeah.
some sectors were down. We have consumer confidence, Michael, that has now come
Oh, I
back up, and
saw
we've
that.
had a market rally. And so
Yeah.
it's literally our economy is all over the place. And so, they continue to say when things meaningfully come down and are balanced, then we'll start, thinking about cutting rates. So I don't expect anything earth-shattering out of the dot plot, but it wouldn't surprise me to see them
Mm.
say, because inflation's come down, to 3.1 as of the last measure, and PPI is generally flat,
Yeah, it was
compared
today, yeah.
and below expectations. I think
Mhm.
that you might see them show a little bit more cuts than they did
Yeah.
before, but not immediately. I don't think you're going to see anything for March. Um,
No,
that's
no,
just my guess.
no chance. Well, there's actually 4 things that I think they talk about. We'll go kind of reverse order. We'll start with unemployment. I think, again, when you read the dot plot, this is how I read it. You get the average, but
Yes.
I also look for the extremes, like what's the highest and what's the lowest.
Right.
So, for unemployment, I think it will be interesting for me how many, if any, because it might be 0, if any, see unemployment over 4.5% next year. I think that will be interesting, right? Unemployment, as we may or may not remember, fell to 3.7 last month.
Right.
So, on the unemployment side, I will be seeing, if anyone, if there's 1 or 2, that'll be meaningful, have unemployment in 2024 over 4.5. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that would not be a great sign. It would say that that person thinks that we are going to head into some recessionary conditions and start to see more layoffs. And so, generally the dot plot, has a pretty tight range. You might have a little outlier before, but they do try to kind of keep a unified front. And so I think that they might temper what they show us again from what they
Mm,
really show in the dot plot
yep.
rather than say I'm the lone ranger that's way off here and I think
Right.
everybody's wrong. I just don't think they're going to do that to try to show this cohesive front. I don't think 4.5. I'd be surprised if I saw someone saying 4.5.
Okay.
Although it doesn't mean I would be surprised to
Right.
see unemployment at 4.5,
Yeah.
right? We
Yeah.
are
Agreed.
clearly, one of
Agreed.
the things that I'm watching, Stephanie Pomboy's a great interview as well. She runs Macro Maven. She's an economist, but she's looking at all of the bankruptcies, and
Mhm.
is a rapid increase in the percentage of bankruptcies right now, faster than in 2008. Okay,
Mm.
so it's not good. So when you start to see corporate bankruptcies and you start to see large layoffs, which we're still seeing kind of
Mhm.
trickle through, they just didn't come all at once, but it's kind of like, what's that show? Everything everywhere all at once. It's like it
Yeah,
all
exactly.
starts to kind of go and then it kind of comes. So I personally think that we could see, a fairly deep, not astronomical, but fairly deep recession that does cause employment to tick up there. But I don't think the Fed dot plot is going to show that. So we'll
Alright.
see.
Yeah, we'll agree. I agree. I think the chances of getting to 4.5 certainly aren't 0, but to your point, that's why I'm gonna look at it, right? Do any of them
Right.
see 2024 at 4.5? Well, let's get to growth. The one on growth will be interesting because I will wonder again if any, like 1 person has at least 1 quarter of negative GDP growth. I think that would be interesting because generally speaking, they're
Yeah.
positive. They don't want to communicate that, but I think there's a chance that one or two of them have at least one quarter of negative GDP growth. It will probably be Q1 or Q2. But that is something on GDP that I will be looking for.
Yes, I agree, and I think that that's a number that, again, kinda lets us know how strong they really feel the economy is. After the print of, I think it was 5.4, am I right?
Five,
Five
five,
point
two, five,
five
two.
two or 5.4,
Yeah.
I think that was much higher than most expected,
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
so it's really hard to tell in this economy,
Yeah.
Michael. I think the lag effect and the fact that the wealthier are doing better, the poor are not, but the wealthy continue to spend, I think could keep us from being in a deep recession, even though I said we could be. I think
Yeah.
it could keep us from being in a deep recession and having that negative GDP print, even if things are very, very flat. So I do see more of like a stagflationary environment.
Mhm.
I doubt that they show negative GDP. Maybe for a quarter, to your point, they say, okay, we might have a dip like first quarter after all the Christmas spending and people
Yeah.
are out of money and they charged up their credit cards and we have a few layoffs and maybe seasonal, but then I think that they come back and
Yeah.
try to show at least slightly higher GDP than inflation over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that brings up inflation, right? Inflation. To me, again, this one might have a range. I think of the 3 that we've talked about so far, this one might be the largest kind of deviation or
Yeah,
range. Um, what do they see it over the year? Do they see, and again, they're usually forecasting PCE core, so everybody's not confused. It's not CPI, it's not PPI, it's PCE
right.
core. Um, I guess the one on that I'll be looking for is how soon do they get a 2 handle? Not 2%, but how soon do they see 2.8, 2.9? Because it's certainly to your point in video one, it seems like inflation is coming in faster than anticipated. To me, will they put that in the dot plot or not will be interesting.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I tend to think, they were already kind of expecting we'd get a two handle, 2 point something, whether that's 2.7, 2.8, 2.9 by
Right,
the end of 2024. And back
right.
to just, interesting aside, Janet Yellen, in her interview today said they expect to have a two in front of the inflation number by the end of the year. And so,
Okay.
that's kind of her best guesstimate is that it's coming down. It's going to be slow. But generally speaking, and she was asked, well, what about if the war escalates between Russia and Ukraine or between Israel and the Middle East? How might that impact us? And she said, definitely those things would be inflationary. And that's
Mhm.
why we need to continue to watch. And given the volatility of um, the global situation, right? The wars, rumors, and also other countries and other geopolitical issues, she does see that inflation isn't over and that it may take a while this year, and some stability to get it down into that two handle. But listen, we were at 3.1, so we're 0.2% for being under three. I wouldn't be surprised if they start showing that number maybe by the end of the second quarter coming
Mhm.
down to 3, maybe 2.9. I think just to be
Yeah,
conservative and not have the markets go nuts,
yeah,
maybe they wait till, third quarter to show that. That would be kind of my, what's their politically expedient
yeah,
non-political response? It's like, let's wait till the third quarter to
yeah,
show it ticking down and then fourth quarter, be in the better twos, the lower
yeah.
twos maybe.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. I think it'll be really interesting. Does anybody have the balls to kind of talk about it in Q1 or Q2? I think you're right. I think the safe answer is Q3. But again, what I'm looking for because there's not a lot this period because it's all kind of baked. I'm looking for who's the extreme. So that'll
Right.
be interesting. And then the final one is rates, right? Last dot plot, the answer was two more rate cuts were or rate hikes, excuse me, rate hikes were coming. Nothing has shown up. It'll be interesting to see how many of them. This is going to be interesting. How many of
Yes.
the 18 or 19 have no more rate hikes? Because
I
that's
think
gonna
most
be
of them.
non-zero. That
Yeah.
could be half, I think.
Yes. I think so, or even more than that. I think
Yeah.
most are gonna say no more rate hikes, but they're still in their language gonna say, if inflation ticks back up, we have no qualms
Yeah.
about raising again. It's just that we think we're making progress and we haven't
Mhm.
seen,
We're
the rest
winning.
of the lag effects.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're winning.
I'd be interesting to see, and I haven't really I've never done this sparsing or looked at, how they come up with like their future casting. So not just 2024, but into 2025 and 2026. So last dot plot we saw,
Mhm.
that they expected to cut a little in 2024, maybe raise a little bit, then a little more in 2025, a little more in
Mhm.
2026, but never back to the zero bound, right? Like
Right,
back in the
right.
two and a half,
Yeah,
three
oh, yeah.
percent Fed funds
Yep,
rate,
yep,
which for us is going to be, let's say in the fives or maybe six, right?
yep.
But it's interesting because knowing that in the last election, Biden tried to pass Build Back Better, which also had tax reform, knowing the amount of our national debt, okay, knowing that they must raise taxes and they already have legislation to do it. They're not going to do it this year, not in an
Mm-mm.
election year.
No.
There's just too many things going against them. So it's not going to happen this year, but I'm interested to see if 2025 gives us any hints that they expect that when the debt is higher, when we have higher tax revenues, if that's going to drive down inflation further and
Mm.
drive down GDP because people simply have
Yeah,
much less to spend when
sure.
they're taxed more. So I'm kind of trying to read between the lines with those dot plots for 2025 to kind of
Mhm.
see what do they think is going to happen with GDP and are they factoring in, I don't know that we'll know, but are they factoring in additional tax revenues and that additional pull on the
Right.
economy, which keeps GDP lower for a while, even if you have lower inflation. So kind of again, a stagnating economy where now rates aren't the problem. It's taxation and GDP.
Yeah, on the rates front, again, it'll be interesting to see how many are at the terminal rate, and then the other thing on the rates is who's the first like, when's the first rate cut, right? Who does that first? And I think they're gonna kinda to your point throughout this, they're gonna push it back until the summer, right, kinda mid-year. But I expect most of them to talk about rate cuts in the second half of 2024, so I'll be looking for that as well.
Yeah, the markets are kind of betting on May. You and I talked a couple
Right.
months ago, and I kind of bet on May. Thinking we're entering a recession now into the first quarter. Again, GDP surprise to the upside. So I was wrong on first quarter being declared, or this last quarter being declared recessionary. But I again, they don't want to spook markets. They want to kind of give this forward guidance, and so it wouldn't surprise me if we start to see on that dot plot a few of them coming in with a rate cut in May or June. But I think most of them are going to push that off to the third quarter,
Yeah.
just to try to, help them with their job to bring things down instead of sparking consumer sentiment, sparking the markets going, we only have 5 months to go, and spending more money and making their fight harder.
Yeah. So it's gonna be a fun day. We got Fed Day, the rate increase or not. We've got the statement, we've got Q&A, and of course, we've just talked about the dot plot. Anna, where can people find you?
Great. You can find me here every week. Social media, Anna Kelly, REI Mom, and my website for coaching, consulting, and deal review help at AnnaKellyInvesting.com.
Thank you so much.